LeetCode problem 1365. How many numbers are smaller than the current number? Given the array nums for each nums at the index I, find out how many numbers in the array are smaller than it. That is, for each nums at the index I, you have to count the numbers of valid j's such as j is not equal to I, and nums at the index j will be less than nums at the index I. Return the answer in the array. So the problem statement is pretty clear and looks pretty simple. Based on the output here, we can see that the value at the 0 index 8 is the greatest, so we return 4 because it's greater than 1, greater than 2, greater than 2 again, and greater than 3. So we can start working on the solution of the problem already. You can say vector int output. Notice here that we didn't specify any size of a vector to hold the array of greatest numbers. No, it's actually to hold the array of numbers greater than it. I greater than j. Yeah. And then we can create our for loop. Index I, every time I is smaller than the size of a vector, I gets incremented. Inside of it we can create our counter used to accumulate all the we're gonna use this counter to accumulate every time nums at the index I is bigger than nums at the index j. Then we create our value. Value 1 will be nums at the index I. Used to compare nums I to nums j, nums j plus 1, and so on. Then we're gonna create our second for loop called j. Every time j is smaller than the size of a vector, j will get incremented. Inside of a for loop, we're gonna create our second value. Let's call it val2, and it's gonna receive the values from the j vector. Notice here that we initialize j as 0 as well, because I used to use that as a second value. Because even though the j is 0 and in the first test case value 1 and value 2 will have the same numbers, it's not gonna give us any extra output, since 8 is not gonna be bigger than 8, 6 is not gonna be bigger than 6. So that's the reason why we used 0 here, just to get all the values from the vector. And if value 1 is bigger than value 2, then the counter gets incremented. Then we're gonna push back the values. Output pushback counter. Return output to the main function. Let's run our code to see if it works. Yes, it does. Let's run it again. Yes, it does. The second way to solve this problem in a much easier way is to actually create a vector the same way and then create what's called auto. And what this auto does is it's gonna take each individual element from a vector of, in this case, vector of nums, and we're gonna compare this auto to the, and we're gonna compare this element 1 to the element 2 used to increment value element 1 is bigger than element 2. So the logic that we are using here is pretty much the same. The only difference that I should say is probably that it's less of a code and it's much cleaner. If you know how to use auto, it's pretty useful tool to use in future coding practices. I'm just gonna call output.pushback counter. Return output. Increment by 1 each iteration. So every time we use pushback in a vector, it always pushes back value to the end of the vector. Since we created a vector without any size, it's gonna push back to the first index because there is no size to of the vector. We're gonna run the code again to see if it works. Yes, it does. Let's see. Does it improve? Yes, it does improve.